It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Hey everybody, it's Bax, and welcome back to Baxy's Musical Podcast. Now think about this for a minute. Imagine you get a chance to play with one of the world's greatest musicians, a guy who is considered to be one of, if not the best at what he does, almost without equal, playing with one of the most notorious rock bands in all of recorded history. And when that guy decides to go solo, he chooses you to play alongside of him. He chooses you to help collaborate in writing new music together. A guy like that could have chosen to play with anybody in the world, but he chose you, the guy who would soon become his very best friend. That nugget of oversimplification is the basic story outline of John Entwistle of The Who and drummer Steve Luongo. Entwistle was a guy who played with Keith Moon and Kenny Jones, but when he branched out to play his own music, it was Steve Luongo who got the call. And Luongo is no slouch. He's played with guys like Jack Bruce of Cream, Richie Blackmore of Deep Purple and Rainbow, Todd Rundgren, Robin Zander of Cheap Trick, Joe Walsh. The list is practically endless. But when Entwistle died in 2002, at the age of 57, he not only left behind this amazing legacy as arguably the greatest bass guitar player in rock history, he also left behind a fair share of uncompleted and largely unpublished work. And up until now, it wasn't exactly clear what or how that music would finally become available. And as it turns out, the right guy for that job was also Steve Luongo. Steve has just helped compile, produce, and resurrect a fabulous collection of demos, rarities, alternate takes, and live cuts from John Entwistle's enormous body of work. The result is the release entitled John Entwistle Rarities Exhumed Volume 1. And if you're a fan of The Who or of the genius of John Entwistle, then this is something really worth looking into. This is my conversation with drummer, producer, and artist Steve Luongo on Baxy's Musical Podcast. There you go.
You have your choice of two backgrounds. You can have this one or this one.
Either one is fantastic. It's better than the background that I'm working on.
Let me see let me see what you're doing. Hang on.
I got a moving blanket and a shitload of CDs. That's
Well, maybe I should go with the spaceship so that I'm not. You know what? It's okay. We're good.
You know what?
How are you?
I am terrific. It's good to talk to you.
Thanks. It's nice to talk to you as well.
Absolutely. So, are you still in Fort Myers? Or are you out of the area right now?
Or did I get blown out into the sea? No,
yeah.
I'm still in Fort Myers. I'm
really?
Still here, and it's amazing. The thing about Fort Myers is 5 miles from here. We went to look at our old home just
right.
to see what happened over there. And if I still lived there, I would be in a lot of trouble, man.
Wow.
5 miles from here, and things are just white. It looks like the big hand just came and moved everything. That's unbelievable.
Unreal.
So I'm very, very lucky, and certainly in the 1% of the 1%. Not without a little damage, but all cosmetic. Nothing compared to what these people dealt with.
Well, all the videos that I had seen, there's a lot of people from up in Massachusetts that go to Florida all the time, and we're totally wiped out, especially on the beach of Fort Myers and everything else. I'm glad you're doing okay, and that you didn't suffer a whole hell of a lot of damage.
Thank you. No, just trees and bushes and shingles and a couple of solar panels, but nothing compared. Nothing life-threatening, nothing that impacts my environment. Inside. So just cosmetic stuff, man.
Good.
Yeah.
So whenever I'm trying to avoid responsibility, I find myself watching drum solo videos all the time. So I wanted to go and look at Steve Luongo videos because I wanted to see that signature move, which I don't think I've ever seen any before, with the monkey playing the cymbals. Is that something you learned in some sort of tutorial? Was that in was that in that syncopation book that we all had as a kid?
No, the monkey thing, no. No, the monkey was he was in Curious George, I think is as close as he ever got to a book. What it was back in the 70s, I was dating a girl, and she gave me, I have it here. She gave me it was a drumming monkey named Zippy, and he actually plays a legitimate beat, and the beat, it sounds like a. So what I would do is hold him up to a microphone, right? And
Right.
so his kick drum is actually playing through, and I can hear it back on my monitors. And then I do the one-handed 2 feet thing, and that was my, I did it for the girls. Girls don't usually
Yeah.
like a drum solo, but you put up the little stuffed animal, man. But yeah, I've been doing it ever since. It's a bit of a gag.
Well, I got to tell you, the monkey's really good.
He is a man. I'm telling
He's
you,
a
my
master.
mentor.
No, I mean it's a great gimmick, and I'm just imagining other drummers looking at this and going, "What the hell is he doing?" And then you hear the rest of the drum solo. It's like, okay, I guess I can forego the monkey. The guy knows what he's doing.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I was playing with the Robin Zander band, and we were opening for REO. And their drummer, very good drummer, I think his name is Steve Peck. Steve Hitt, I'm sorry. And we opened for him 2 nights. And on the first night, I did the monkey thing. And the next night, they came out on stage to see the monkey thing. So it's become a signature. And Rod Morgenstein said to me, man, if you can do something that no one else has ever done, that's saying something.
That's something.
That's your legacy. So yeah.
So I got the new album a couple weeks ago, the John Entwistle Rarities Exhumed, and I have to tell you, this is a really, for anyone that loved the Who or loved John Entwistle, particularly the way the style that he played. This is just an awesome, beautifully done collection. Tell me about how this came together.
I had been being asked over the years by fans, is there anything that you haven't put out? Is there anything that we could hear? Is there any more music? And, I always knew that there was, but it's kind of right time, right place. You have to find the right people to promote it and the right people to create. So, and this year, I made a good connection with Deco Entertainment, and I thought it was about time. So, what that collection is we back in the 90s, John and I were the musical supervisors for a children's show, believe it or not, called Vampires, right? And it was kids that hung out in a junkyard, and then the junkyard gets hit by a meteor, and all the junk cars turn into vampires, and they suck the gas out of other cars. Kids get turned into the superhero, and they fight the vampires. So we wrote the title theme for, the theme song for the show, and then we wrote another 13 songs. And when that happened, we were shopping a demo around. We had, we had gone to England, written some stuff, recorded it at John's place, and I was shopping it around. And my business manager said, I'm going to play this for my cousin. He's working on a new TV show. Well, the reason the things that are on here on Exhumed exist is because it was a kid's show. So you can't use violence, can't use sex, can't use drugs, can't use weapons. So, and of course, all of those things are in our music.
I was going to say that's everything the Who stood for.
Yeah, right. And so we had to rewrite the lyrics. They loved the sound, they loved the whole thing, but we had to rewrite lyrics and rearrange songs. So these songs, the songs that are on here, are either alternate versions or versions that were never released to the songs that we did for that TV show. Left for Dead, for instance, has completely different lyrics and a very long run out at the end. And so I just thought it would be good to include some of those things, especially it's a fan driven record. I did this for the fans, knowing that, I'm not looking for critical acclaim. I'm not looking for a top 10 hit single. I'm trying to give John's fans what they wanted, and that's a little bit more John. So This seemed like a good way to do it. We remixed, remastered, and did some things. And then with regard to the demos, we wrote some songs together to hopefully be used on a new Who record back in the day. And that never happened. John, went into the sweet by and by. And I thought, I think the fans would like to hear these, even though they're kind of not very polished demos, they do show where John's head was at with regard to what he might submit for a new Who album. So rather than worry about quality, I wanted it's more of like a history lesson than it is an audio
Yeah.
lesson.
Is there? I'm just out of total curiosity. Is there more music to have chosen from? I mean, is this the only one of this kind that's going to be released, or will there be more versions of it?
No, no, there's there's a lot more. The thing is organizing it. No, there are more studio tracks. There are more demos. I have so much live material from the band. We record it every night, so I've got 100 shows, give or take.
Yeah.
And and again, it wasn't about perfect performances. The things that I picked for this album were actually from the last tour that we ever did in 2001. And it's funny because we wanted John to sing, Trick of the Light and Success Story, and he grubbed, my voice. And then at the end, he finally said, "Well, they're not coming to hear me sing, are they?" No, they're not. So the stuff that's on there, the live stuff that's on there is raw. It's there's no overdubs, there's no fixes. It's just the way we played it, warts and all, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, I could. It's volume 1 for a reason, because volume 2 is coming.
Right.
So I've started prepping some of the stuff for that, and they're going to be the fans will be very surprised, because one of the things that John and I talked about doing in the future, when we didn't want to go out and tour as much as we did back then, he wanted to do soundtrack material, and write for films and write for television and so on and so forth. So some of the things that'll be on volume 2 will reflect that.
So some of the things that really stood out for me, I'll Try Again Today, I think is just a great freaking track, and maybe one of those songs that could have been one of his best songs ever. It's a really powerful song.
Oh, thanks. It's that we had an interesting process when we were writing songs together. We would bring in our demos to each other. I'd give him mine, he'd give me his, and I would listen, and I would think, okay, we could do this, and so on and so forth. And he naturally gravitated, if I gave him 20 songs, he naturally gravitated to the ones that really, that moved him. And that particular track in its infancy was one of them. And we had a lot of fun writing that. And, I actually came up with the title "I'll Try Again Today" based on a guitar player friend of mine who passed away recently. In my humble opinion, one of the absolute guitar heroes of all time, but never got his just due, I think. So this is about the struggle that musicians face every day to just keep pushing. Try again today.
There's also a version of Boogeyman too. And does that one include Keith Moon on this album?
Yeah,
it does.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, and the how that came about, sometimes you have to wait 20 years before you finish these things. That was originally a demo that John had intended for the Who back in the 70s. So the track, when we were playing each other the demos, he played me that, and I said, "Who's playing drums?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "I think that's Keith Moon." And he goes, "Oh yeah, that's him." And I'm thinking, well, we got to use this. So they recorded the tracks 78, maybe 77, 78. And it was just the bass track and the drums with John singing great vocal. That's his vocal from back then. And the little horn bits in the middle, which are actually not done on horns. When he showed up to the session that day, he forgot his horns. So he had to do everything with his mouth. Don't ask me to do it, but he could do it. And so I said, well, we've got to finish this song. This is, to have Keith Moon, I mean, on anything.
Yeah.
He was playing great. He played some just amazing stuff on that track. So John said, well, I'll look for the multi-track, the big tape where you do the overdubs. And funny story, he couldn't find it because he has a tape room on the 3rd floor of his house with all of his 2 inches and half tracks and so on. And he said, I couldn't find it. And I was walking out of the room. And he said, and I heard a great bloody bang. said it scared me, and I turned around, and it was the Bogeyman tape that had fallen over, and it was labeled on the wrong side.
Oh, really?
So yeah, he said, "Ooh," and we all agree that the third floor of this house up around here was haunted, absolutely haunted.
Yeah. The reason why I questioned whether it was him or not, because I had read that he was a part of that track, but he was doing something that he doesn't normally do when Keith Moon played. He was playing on a hi hat. Oftentimes he just avoided that or didn't even have it with him. So that's why I was like,
Yeah.
well, is that him or is that not him?
Well, yeah, I think at that point they were trying to get Keith to sort of, settle down maybe. And there's a lot of just good time keeping drums in there. And yeah, the hi-hat. Well, John told me he didn't want the hi-hat because it wasn't loud enough. So, but I think for this particular thing, he obviously used a hi-hat. But yeah, that no mistaking, that's Keith Moon.
Yeah. You had a very close relationship with John. How did you meet John?
We met at a NAMM show, believe it or not. It was summer '87. The NAMM show was at McCormick Place in Chicago. And our front of house sound man for my band Rat Race Choir, when we were kids, we used to do The Who and all that stuff. So we knew it cold. And our engineer said he had just come back from Music Messe in Germany, where he had played with John. It was another trade show that's in March, and then this one's in June. And he said, I played with John Entwistle. I told him about you guys. And we were like, well, how do we get to play with John Entwistle? And he said, well, I told him all about you guys. I'll introduce you to him. And I have a slot at a jam and so on and so forth. And sure enough, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. Here comes John Entwistle just walking down the street. And we were introduced. And he's, dressed in full rock star regalia with the spider and the jacket and the shirt and the perfect hair. And he said, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. And I said, you want a jam? And he said, anytime, mate. So I said, that's a license to steal. So I went onto the NAMM floor, and I found out who does the biggest NAMM jam. And I said, listen, I'm playing with John Entwistle, and we'd like to play at the jam tonight. Little poetic license. And they said, John Entwistle wants to play. Okay. And they sent a car. They sent a limousine to my motel, and I use the word loosely because I think the car they sent was bigger than the front facade of the motel. And I picked John up. He had no idea where we were going, and he just very accommodating. And we drove down the alley of the Vic Theater, went down the dressing room stairs, and when we finally came out on stage after half a dozen acts, I think Eddie Van Halen and Leslie West, Neil Schon, Dweezil Zappa, I can't remember everybody that was there. And he said, well, what are we going to play? I said, we'll play Who songs. And he said, well, I don't know any. So he said, we'll teach him. And we ran through the Live at Leeds stuff, and we ran through Won't Get Fooled Again, Summertime Blues. And he said, you guys even learned the mistakes. You left them on the record. We learned them. And then we walked out on stage to not hundreds of people, but thousands of people. And it just, because we were so used to playing the material, it was no big deal. Let's just play this stuff. So we're just playing it again. And he felt it. And he and I hung out in the green room for the rest of the night, telling jokes and stories and talking about this and that and the other thing. And I said, listen, I got to bail because I have an early flight in the morning. And he handed me his phone number and said, give me a call. And
wow.
That's how it started.
That's amazing. The perception of John, not just on a musical level, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just, on a personal level, he always seemed to be the quiet one in the band, which, compared to Pete and Keith Moon, that may or may not be that hard to do, but he always seemed to be the more reserved and serious of the four guys. And you can never assess someone's personality just by watching them play in that kind of environment. Tell me about what John was like, and what's the misconceptions of what he was like.
Well, first of all, if you can call him the quiet one until you stand in front of that amp.
True.
And he always said, Keith was the maniac. Pete was the intellectual genius. Roger was the face out in front. He said, "What am I going to be?" He said, "I'll just stand here and play." And you look at him, and he just appears to not really be doing that much until you focus on his hands, and it's like, holy Christmas, he's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's how it happened. And unfortunately for John, a lot of the sound, a lot of the Who's sound, by all their admission, came from John. But whenever he was doing a lead, the cameramen turned on to Pete, and it was like, no, that's not where it's coming from. So he was somewhat, I don't want to say overlooked, but he wasn't as stunning a visual as everybody else, which is why he dressed like a peacock. He was always wearing sparkly stuff, and
Right.
he was always, he was a very smart dresser, and so that was his thing. That just became his thing.
But musically, I mean, he stands apart from, nearly every bass player before and since. I mean, there's really never been a guy who played like John Entwistle, and there's never really been a guy who could play like that. As a guy who's played with him, for the course of, I don't know, like 2 decades or whatever it wound up being, especially as a drummer, what made him so special as a bass player?
Well, he was more than a bass player. He was, in his own terms, a bass guitarist. And really, it felt like playing with another drummer because he was so into the time and so clever about what he did. It was almost like trading off with another drummer. And you could play anything at him and he'd play it right back at you. And we used to sort of chase each other musically. And it was just not really challenging one another, but really, oh yeah, watch this. Oh yeah, watch this. And some of the solos that we did together were just incredible, just really incredible.
When we talk about, drumming and bass playing and the rhythm section of any band, this is a guy, he had played with Keith Moon. He could have played with, Kenny Jones, could have played with anybody during his solo career, but he felt really comfortable playing with you. And to me, that's a hell of a compliment to any drummer, that a guy of that stature is saying, hey, you know what? I want to play with Steve Luongo. That's the guy I feel comfortable with. You have to take that one to the grave with you. I mean, to have that guy have such an endorsement with you for so long is fantastic.
Well, it is fantastic. And I think the thing behind that was the fact that we played so well together. When we were on stage, it wasn't the drummer from Rat Race Choir and the bass player from The Who. It was 2 guys in a band. There was never that hierarchy competition. I get my own. He was one of the guys, and he played like one of the guys. And I never felt like there was any place I couldn't go. He loved pushing the envelope, and he loved when I pushed the envelope, and we just found this groove together. And most drummers, all drummers, I'm sure, know that if you lock in with your bass player, you're setting the foundation for anything else that anybody wants to put on top. He was just incredible and so prolific. I mean, he never played the same move twice or in the same way. Very inventive. And, as far as I'm concerned, as a player, his choice of players, well, that's about as big a compliment as you could get. And that's, and I will take it to the grave, which is right over there.
Right over there. So, and actually, when you listen to the record, Oxumed, you can hear the quality of the musicianship all the way through. Great guitar playing. The vocals are really good. I mean, even though they are demos or, remastered songs, I mean, you can definitely hear that, he picked and chose, wisely who he was going to play with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, when we decided we wanted to put the band together, this is a funny story. We had played with the guitar player who's on that record, Godfrey Townsend. No H, no relation, no Ferrari, as John would say. And he was perfect. I mean, he just played the way we needed him to play. And so we were talking about guitar players, and he said, well, what about that guy we jammed with at the China Club? I said, oh, yeah, Godfrey. He's great. I'll ring him up. And so I had been playing with Godfrey in some other just throwaway bands, and I said, do you want to join? He said, absolutely. So we're on the bus. This is after rehearsal, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it gets a little foul language, but
it's really okay.
oh well.
I guess it depends.
I'm just gonna,
depends
I'm,
on the
I'm gonna
amount.
stop it at one point. Okay. Anyway, we're on the bus. The three of us are in the front, keyboard players in the back. Three of us are in the lounge. And he says to Godfrey, "What's your surname?" He didn't know his last name. And Godfrey says, "Townsend." And John goes, "You're joking, right?" And he said, "No, no, 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 no." And and then it goes on. It gets pretty crazy, but and so John, I'll tell you the rest of the story. John decides he's going to take the piss out of Godfrey, and he says, "You're joking." And Godfrey goes, "Oh, come on, Pete, what a genius!" And John goes, "Genius? He writes a bunch of lyrics and makes you do all the work, and you think he's a genius?" And Godfrey says, "What about Won't Get Fooled Again?" And John goes, "Exactly. Won't get fooled again about fucking what?" And so, and believe me, this is John joking, not. And so Godfrey says, "What about Tommy?" And John goes, "Tommy? What a piece of shit! He can't hear you, he can't see you, and he can't tell you because he doesn't fucking know." End of conversation. And John and I laughed about it for a while. But the guitar player was like, and he did. He introduced him on stage. Godfrey Townsend, no relation, no nose, no Ferrari.
That's great. You did wind up playing with a bunch of other real notable people beyond John Entwistle. Jack Bruce, Joe Walsh, Richie Blackmore, Todd Rundgren, and a bunch of others. Not all those names are the easiest guys to get along with or the easiest guys to play with. And I'm not going to point fingers, but I mean, when you're playing with guys that are not John Entwistle and you're not necessarily playing with guys who are particularly easy to get along with, as a drummer, do you find it hard to get the job done, or do you just go in there professional and do what you have to do to get through it?
Well, no, I never found it hard to get the job done because most of the people all of the people that I played with over the years were like-minded. And I suppose I had a little bit of cachet having already played with Entwistle, although I played with Leslie West and Mountain at the same time that I was playing with John. He'd be off with The Who, I'd be out with Leslie. But no, I did, it's funny that you asked that because when I did the thing with the guys from AC/DC, Brian and Cliff, I produced those records and I co-wrote the songs with Brian and the guitar player. And I was surprised at how interested they were in my, I don't want to say approval, but did I like what we were doing? As a producer, I mean, a lot of respect. And Robin Zander, he's just a blast. I mean, you go out with Robin, it's like you're putting a garage band back together and going out and playing your favorite stuff. He's like the eternal kid. Cliff and Brian, Williams and Johnson, they were very easy to work with. Brian just did his thing. I mean, he was just out there walking, he was just Brian. And Cliff, surprisingly, and I don't mean this again in a derogatory way, after having played with Entwistle, I was pleasantly surprised at how good a bass player Cliff was. You never get to hear it on the records because he's playing the root and the pedal point. And on the things that we wrote, they were a little bit more eccentric. And Cliff, like I said, I was really pleasantly surprised at what a great player he was. Jack Bruce, the only thing you had to do with Jack was play the parts right. And we did a thing, we did a Cream set where we played, I Feel Free and Born Under a Bed. We did just all the classic, real Sunshine and all of that. And I remember the only two things Jack said to me that were, they weren't off color. We were doing I Feel Free, and he turns to me and he says, "All right, Steve, you'll sing Eric's parts." And it's like, I'll sing Eric's parts. Who says that? And so they're in the verse, I forget what it is. Dance, won't you dance with me? And he said, no, 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 it's dance. I said, okay, dance it is. And he was a great guy. I mean, I got along with Jack. I played with him a few times in different situations. And
Yeah.
the thing was, if you could play, that's what got Jack's attention and his respect. And Mark Hitt and I had, I mean, we knew the Cream stuff like the back of our hand. So it's like we were playing it with a different bass player that just happened to be Jack Bruce. And you could see that, he was enjoying it because he wasn't worried about, are these guys going to mess it up? And
Right.
it was pretty comfortable.
And he's played with more disgruntled drummers in the past too. So
yes, yes, he certainly has. And I mean, John would say, you met one of the nice ones, because multiple person. But I found Jack to be. We were looking to do a tour after we did this thing. We were looking
Really?
to go and do a full blown tour, but he had health problems and eventually passed, so that one never happened. But yeah, he was. I mean, I can't say what he would have been like after 3 months on the road, but the gigs that we played together, he was great.
Yeah, I've interviewed Roger Glover, and I've interviewed Ronnie James Dio and his widow, and I don't hear those same kind of glowing stories from Richie Blackmore.
No.
I
Well, there now.
And they have
Okay.
and they have reasons for those stories too. I mean, I understand it's not just all in a vacuum, but they have their own their own personal issues with Richie and his the way he operates.
Well, yeah, and the truth of the matter is, out of all the people that you mentioned, Richie was the only one that was aloof and disconnected and sort of snarky, and that's just Richie.
Yeah.
I was in Rainbow for about a week because I'm not somebody that does well with subordinates. You know what I mean? If something's wrong, I'm going to tell you it's wrong. I'm used to being in a band, not being a hired gun.
Right.
If there's anything wrong with that, but I'm used to being in a cacophony of chemistry and musical ideas. So there came a thing we were recording in the studio, and something question about the time. Was it too fast, or was I keeping time? And I said, oh, well, let's go listen against the click. And the fact that I challenged, instead of just saying, oh yes, Richie, it's me, I said, no, it's not me, man, and let's go listen. And so that kind of sealed that deal.
So I was online on your website, and I got to look at Steve Luongo designs, which I thought was really, really cool. My first question was, do these shirts come in short and poorly? And then I realized, well, maybe not. But these are the artwork that you've done is really very, very cool and very interesting. And you've applied those pieces to material and made shirts out. And tell me about your artwork, because it's actually very, very impressive.
No, thank you. It's art was there for me as long as music. I think I had pencils and pens before I had drumsticks. So, and I always was just drawn to that. In school, I would go to the art classes. They were the ones that I did show up for. And, over the years, it was just like a hobby or a release from, all the tension of a gig or all the tension of recording. And it was just a way of relaxing. And I was doing an event down here in Fort Myers, and the guy who was doing it with me said, we need some publicity pictures. So we're going through my pictures on the computer, and a piece of art popped up, and he said, what's that? I said, that's my art. And then picture, another piece of art. He said, stop, what is that? I said, it's my art. He said, have you shown it? I said, yeah, my mother's seen it, my wife has seen it. He said, that's not what I mean, have you ever shown it in a gallery? And I said, no. And so one thing led to another, and Paul Cola, who was the guy in question, he said, we have to put this at our event. I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want people buying it because it's at an event and no. And he said, well, don't sign it and we'll see how it does. And we sold everything. So he said, now you got to join the Naples Art Association. And I went through that whole thing, and I was invited to all these different galleries. And, when I'm with art people are a very specific breed. I felt like the whole world was a tuxedo and I was a pair of brown shoes. It's it was I felt so out of my element, and I actually wound up getting an award for this, that, and the other thing. And then Paul comes up to me and he says, "You should put this on shirts." What? So he's thinking, put the pieces of art on a black t-shirt, and that's just not for me.
Right.
I would, and I love Robert Graham. I love fashion. And the downside about being a drummer is you don't get to really wear a lot of cool clothes because they wind up either getting ripped or
Sweat
very
through.
sweaty. Oh, yeah. So, but I always loved fashion. So I said, so I'm thinking about if I'm going to do this on shirts, I'm going to do something that no one's ever done before. Now, Robert Graham did all the beautiful collars and the patterns and the embroidery and all that. And I thought, well, what if I take a whole piece of art, a 40 by 60 canvas, and make a shirt out of it? What would that look like? Full scale, not a repeat of this piece of art, but
Right.
just a whole, like I'm making a shirt out of a canvas. And that's what they are. That's why they're so big. It's so bold, and it's like an artist print. So I decided to embroider the signature into the collar, along with the name and the edition number, 1 of 20, because I only did 20 in each size of each piece.
Right.
And it just exploded in the best way. But I wound up. I would call my friend. It started with Eddie Money. I said, Eddie, I've got some samples, that I was having made in China and in India. And I said, if they'd be great, okay, Stevie, send them on. And, and I did. And he wore them on stage for every show. Then Mark Rivera from Billy Joel's band started wearing them at the Garden every night, and, at their residency. And some country guys got into it. Billy Dean. There was a store here in town, a men's shop that was selling them. I get a call from the owner and he says, do you know Billy Dean? I said, well, I don't know him, but I know who he is, country artist. He said, well, he's here and he's looking at your shirts and he wants to know this and that and the other thing. Well, I said, look, tell him, just to hang out and I'll come down. It was 5 minutes away. And we started talking. He said, I love this one. I love that one. Now, the truth is I would never charge another artist retail. But I'm in a retail store with a guy who's repping my line. So Billy bought 3 shirts. That's $1,800. So, and I would give anybody, if you're a musician, I cut the price in half. And so I said to him, Billy, give me your address because I wouldn't ever do this. I'll send you 3 more on the house just so that, I know that I did the right thing by a musician. He wears them all the time. I wound up sending him the rest of the collection. It's
That's great.
I tell you what, I never expected it. I did want to do something different. No one has ever done an entire fashion line based on the art of a single artist. And so that's what I did.
But to have a second career out of it is pretty remarkable. I mean,
Man,
really.
Yeah, and I love it. I mean, I love the fashion part of it. I love designing the shirts and doing the silhouette. And yeah, it's great. It's actually a third career because the art career came first. That was, I couldn't believe how successful that was.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not Gauguin or any of that, but I mean, people were buying the art. They were freaking out about it. I had a window in downtown Fort Myers in the summer with about a dozen pieces. Some guy came along, bought the whole window. So I said, okay, well, this is working. This is good. But, it's not music and it's not, it's not that.
Yeah.
And I love the art. I just never thought of it as a commercial venture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I never really realized that I could sell it or that anybody would even care. And when my friend Paul just freaked out over the whole thing, it was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Well, like I said, I poked my nose around it a little bit, and they are really cool shirts. There's no getting around it.
We do 2X if you think that we can work it out.
Well, let me talk that one over with my wife and see if she's cool with that. But no, I thought they were very, very cool. So
but I'll take care of it, man. No, don't worry about that.
Oh.
You're inside.
I appreciate it. I also stumbled across the rock and roll show and tell podcast that you have been doing, and listened to a couple of episodes, and I really liked it. I mean, like the one you did with Steve Stevens, I thought was really cool. You know, I mean,
Well, that yeah, that's
that's a
go
guy
ahead.
you've known for almost your whole life, right?
Yeah. When and the thing with Steve, well, the thing with the show was when COVID happened and everybody was out of work. Everybody started playing acoustic guitars or singing or taking requests on keyboards or whatever. And that's nobody wanted to hear me play guitar. Um, although I did play on those two demos, but nobody, it's not something I could entertain with people with for hours.
Right.
So I have a friend who's a guitarist in Zebra, Randy Jackson, and Randy was doing a great guy. Randy was doing an acoustic show where he played Beatles and he played Zebra songs and he played Led Zeppelin, and he said you should talk to people because you love to talk. And I said, well, yes, I do. But I didn't want to just do interviews. You see, you and I are having a conversation, same conversation that we would have if we were backstage, if we were at the hotel bar, if we were in a green room,
Right.
because I love people in the business, no matter what part of the business they're in, and there's always something to talk about. And so I said, all right, well, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to do like a chat show type of thing, I want to do it with my friends that I haven't seen in 30 years. Because in this business, Steve, I've known Steve Stevens since he was 16, and his drummer used to sneak him in to see our band play. And, I said before about Mark Hitt being one of the unsung heroes of guitar. Steve counted Mark as one of his major influences,
Really?
as did Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. And so we got to talk about those things. Now, think about this. My phone book is filled with some great phone numbers. But if Jack is gone, but if I just rang Jack up after a few years and said, hey, Jack, it's Steve. How you doing? All right, Steve. What do you want? So I kind of thought, you know what? This is a great way for me to reconnect with all of my friends without being weird, just calling them up.
Right.
And that's what it is. It's just come on the show and let's talk about stuff. And that's what it is. And Steve came on, Buck Dharma's been on. Although I try to go for I don't try to go for, but I try to go for the musicians that nobody really knows. Or they're not as familiar with, not the household names.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the guys that back up Billy Joel every, once a month at the Garden. Those are killer players. I've had most of those guys on this show. And then we do a thing on Friday night called Free for All Friday, which anybody who's got the key to get in can come in.
Right.
And I have guys coming in, from backstage at Madison Square Garden saying, yeah, we're about to go on. We wanted to say, and I've got guys from Aruba, Antigua, Costa Rica, and musicians all over the world. And it's been the most, I never expected it to go on for more than 2 years, but here we are.
There you go. So now you got the fourth part of your career right there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, I guess, NBC hasn't called me yet, but we'll see.
It's time. There's time. You're still a young fella. I'm sure they'll be knocking on your door at some point. Hey, again, the John Entwistle Rarities Exhumed album is out. It's fantastic. You did a really, really good job with this. Best of luck with it. I'm actually looking forward to volume 2. How soon do you think that'll be out?
Well, if they wanted it out by Christmas, I could get it out by Christmas. I don't know what the long-term plan is. I am so comfortable with Deco Entertainment that I really, I'm not over their shoulder. When are we doing this? They know their gig. They are such a progressive yet traditional label. I imagine, what are we in September? October, almost November. I would think in the spring, maybe it'll be out by the spring. It could be out any time, but it has to do with their rhythm and whatever they do. So yeah, I would say in the spring. And I think I was going over some of the tracks last night and today. I think people are just going to be blown away with what John was doing and where he was headed and what we were trying to accomplish. And yeah.
Steve, I really appreciate the time today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Best of luck with this whole project. I'm for any Who fan, they'll love it. They'll absolutely eat this up.
Cool. That's what I wanted. It's really, again, it's always about the fans. John, you know, they used to say John would show up at the opening of an envelope if his fans. He would. He'd play at the, you know.
Yeah.
So I hope they, you know, I hope they receive it with the love that it was created.
I'm sure they will. Steve, great to talk to you. Best of luck.
And you, Michael, thank you so much for having me. Anytime you want to follow up, you know how to find me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See
Bye-bye.
you soon.
The name of the new record is John Entwistle, Rarities Exhumed Volume 1 on Deco Records. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to like it, share it, rate it, tell all your friends about it. You can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. And thanks again for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.